A Passion for Mushrooms by Chronological. Chapter 19. Asking Around. The first thing Bilbo needed to do was determine whether or not it was really gold that troubled Thorin's mind. It would be quite silly to try to save the king from madness, only to learn that Thorin was simply worried about some bit of kingly business, like a trade agreement with Mirkwood. So, because he was a straightforward and sensible hobbit, he asked. Thorin, as always, said there was nothing troubling him when Bilbo asked him at breakfast. This, of course, was a blatant lie, proven by the fact that Thorin said barely anything else at all during the meal and only started to eat after Bilbo pressed a bit of honeyed toast to his lips. Despite how worried Bilbo was for his friend, that nearly undid him. Of course, he ought to have offered a spoonful of mushroom porridge, but the honey was sweet and he thought it would encourage Thorin's appetite to taste it, which had worked. And if Thorin's tongue slid briefly over the pad of Bilbo's thumb when the king accepted the morsel, it was not intentional. If Bilbo then put the finger to his own mouth, it was only because it was sticky from the honey. Anyway, Thorin did not notice, and he did start eating his porridge after tasting the toast, so it was fine. Honey did not matter. Thorin's state of mind did. To test the theory of whether or not the gold sickness lay once again on the king, Bilbo had purchased a small gold lapel pin in the market. His mushroom stew mixes were doing well enough that he could afford a bit of extravagance, and he liked it. The pin was cleverly crafted to look like one of his favorite flowers, celandine. It reminded him of the sprig in his buttonhole, which he might have worn when out about in the Shire at that time of year. Dropping it on the table was easy enough, and did not attract Thorin's notice. The king's eyes did not seem drawn to the gold, the way they had been when Erebor had been retaken. As Bilbo gathered his pan and the leftover food to return to his own apartment, he left the pin behind on the table. Thorin caught him at the door.
"You dropped this."
His voice was flat, and his eyes were on Bilbo, not the gold. "Oh, thank you," Bilbo said, then frowned. He hadn't thought this plan through sufficiently, and his hands were quite full. "Just put it in the breadbasket, if you will." Thorin made no move to do so.
"Was it a gift?"
he asked. Bilbo blinked. "Dwarves don't give gifts?" he said slowly, wondering if Thorin was even more unwell than he'd suspected. "I bought it at Kundar & Sons, the jeweler with the new stained glass storefront in the market." Something changed in Thorin's face, and he looked suddenly much more relaxed, though he did not quite smile.
"Yes, I know the place. Kundar has done well with it, indeed. It is almost exactly as his father's shop, Gandar and Sons, looked before the fall."
"How wonderful," Bilbo said, feeling monumentally encouraged that Thorin was making conversation, even if it was while he was holding his heavy cast-iron pan and on his way out the door. "If they have equaled the old store with only a year of work, I can only imagine what they will do in 10 years' time." Unfortunately, Thorin did not meet Bilbo's smile or join in the happy expectations of future glory. Instead, he frowned at the golden pin in his hand.
"You do not wear much jewelry, except your magic ring."
"Well," Bilbo said, searching frantically for an explanation that had nothing to do with testing Thorin by exposing him to small amounts of gold. "This is celandine."
"Celandine?"
"The flower, it's called celandine. In the Shire, it means joys in the days to come. And it's considered lucky to wear a sprig of it on your person if you find one blooming." Nodding gravely, Thorin stepped close and pinned the little flower to Bilbo's waistcoat.
"Then I wish you joy in your day, and in all future days."
Flustered by the proximity, and Thorin's hands on his person, Bilbo only just managed to repeat the well-wishing before taking his leave. The gold had not distracted Thorin, at least not as Bilbo had feared it might, which was good to know, but did not help with the underlying problem. Because Bilbo still had no idea what troubled Thorin so. After Thorin, Bilbo approached Balin. Balin was the busiest of Bilbo's friends, for he was Thorin's closest advisor, and did much of the work involved in ruling Erebor, but he always made time for the hobbit's questions. Still, he did not have a satisfactory answer to this one.
"It is true that Thorin has been less circumspect about his unhappiness than anyone would desire a king to be,"
Balin said, sounding terribly unsympathetic.
"but there is nothing I can do about it."
"Well, you needn't trouble yourself if you do not like to," Bilbo said coldly. "I am sure I would not wish to inconvenience you, but do you not know why he is unhappy?" At that, Balin looked sharply at Bilbo, searching his face. For a moment, the hobbit hoped that Balin would say something helpful. Unfortunately, the only wisdom the old dwarf had to offer was,
"Look to your own happiness, Blood Baggett. You can take no responsibility for another's.
This was entirely unsatisfactory, of course, but there was no helping it. Bilbo couldn't get nothing more from Balin, so he went elsewhere for advice. Although taking tea with Lady Dis was always a pleasure, she proved no more helpful than Balin had. While she had quite a number of thoughts on his new muffin recipe, the quality of the tea, the work Dale was doing to reclaim the desolation, the foolishness of Doran's political faction within the Merchant Guild, and the unacceptable hours Taddeo kept Keely out hunting, she would not speak of her brother. The most Bilbo got from her was a tentative confirmation that the king was unhappy. Not mad, only unhappy, according to those who knew him best. Bilbo laid down on the green granite path in the middle of his mushrooms and sighed for the relief of it. The conclusion fit well enough with Bilbo's own observations. Even though the king had raged at Leah, he'd apologized immediately. There was probably no danger to anyone else if Thorin was only unhappy, but it was still a dreadful situation. Balin could say what he liked, but Bilbo was sure there must be something he could do to cheer up his friend. Naturally, he turned next to the two people most likely to make Thorin smile. Keely was worse than useless. Apparently, he and Tario had defeated a whole troop of orcs on their most recent hunting trip. The prince thought this should lead to some pleasant recognition of Tario, and blamed his uncle's unhappiness for the fact that it had not. Indeed, the young lover repeated many times that though he did not blame anyone in particular for the king's bad mood, it was clearly a problem for everyone in the mountain. He said this so plaintively that Bilbo quite despaired of any help from that quarter. Some people would rather complain about a problem than fix it, though Bilbo had never thought any member of the company to be of that ilk. Fortunately, Fili was willing to take the matter more seriously than his brother. He nodded seriously when Bilbo haltingly explained how unhappy Thorin had been. When Bilbo asked if the prince had any ideas on how they might cheer up the king, Fili grinned. I wondered if our brilliant burglar would be able to work his way through this particular problem on his own, when only pride was at stake. Confused, Bilbo said, I am sure I am not too proud to ask for help when Thorin's happiness is concerned. No, Fili laughed. Not too proud for that. As it happens, I thought of a solution to the issue over a week ago. Uncle's misery is so obvious that it quite softened my heart. And you have been letting him languish when you might have cheered him up. Fie and for shame, you selfish boy. Frowning, Fili said, Now that is harsh. As you well know, I could not act on my own in this. Swallowing his demand for an explanation, which would probably have something to do with secretive dwarven ridiculousness, Bilbo decided that the best thing to do would be to move forward. Well, then tell me what can be done, and I will do it gladly. At this point, I would give my right hand just to see him smile. Nothing so dramatic or complicated, Fili promised. Just come to my forge with us tomorrow morning. Uncle is teaching me to set brighter lights in white crystal, so you shall have the opportunity to see that it is not magic. Between the two of us, we can make him smile again. Bilbo hoped that there was more to Fili's plan than he outlined, but since it was better than nothing, he readily agreed. Still at breakfast the following morning, he double-checked with Thorin. It would do no good to upset the king too much while attempting to cheer him. Making scones with clotted cream, hot sausages, fried eggs, and a side of trilbies and savory sauce probably helped to put the monarch in a good mood. Thorin ate without Bilbo's direct prompting, anyway. Fili invited me to join the two of you at his forge today to see how you put light into crystals. There was no point in beating around the bush, and Thorin didn't seem upset by the abrupt way Bilbo broached the subject. He paused in his eating, but only very briefly.
It is a sight worth seeing, the king said, but you will have to promise to take care. The light we use can burn even hotter than the molten metals. Of course, Bilbo said quickly. I'll stay out of the way. You won't even know I'm there. Thorin frowned. I did not mean to say you would be unwelcome. Indeed, as a master of another guild, you honor us by taking time away from your own craft to view our work. Oh! Grinning into his mushrooms, Bilbo said, Well, I am not so lofty as that, Thorin, nor so busy. Leah can handle drying the trilbies on her own this morning, and we shall do something nice in the afternoon to make up for my taking time away. The frown smoothed away from Thorin's face, and the king put on that horrid expressionless demeanor that hid all of his thoughts as opaquely as a stone wall. She manages your affairs well, then. I trust her with the mushrooms, if that is what you mean, though I still hold the harvesting for myself. I've taught her how, of course, but she doesn't get the same pleasure from growing things as she does from cooking them, so there is no reason for me to share if I do not care to. Have you given her a gift yet?
Thorin's eyes were on his plate, but he had stopped eating. For a moment, Bilbo was confused. This had been quite clear the dwarves did not give gifts, as a rule, with only a few exceptions. One of those had been for Thorin, who might give gifts as a king. Another had been for courting, which obviously did not apply to Leah, who was barely out of the dwarven equivalent of her teens. However, a third had been masters and their apprentices, hadn't it?
Oh dear! I haven't at all, and I really ought to have, oughtn't I? That is at your own discretion.
Thorin hesitated.
It is always better to consider such things carefully, not to act rashly and risk. Well, it is always best not to act rashly.
Bilbo could have fainted with relief. Reasonable enough, he said. Then you don't think I have left it beyond the bounds of propriety?
No,
Thorin said very softly.
There will be no harm at all in leaving the matter alone for a few months yet, until you are quite sure.
Good. What do you think I should get her? Paling as though Bilbo had suggested the king send his heir to face a dragon in single combat, Thorin said,
You cannot ask that of me.
Why not?
Because you cannot.
Rising abruptly from the table, Thorin went over to the mosaic on the wall. He seemed to prefer talking to the Bilbo made out of tiles than the one at his breakfast table.
Ask another member of the company.
Okay, Bilbo said slowly, but I don't want to offend anyone else the way I have obviously offended you. Is it a guild secret or something? Would it be okay to ask Bomba as the head of my guild? As I have never had an apprentice before, I really do need guidance on what sort of gift I'm supposed to give her. No one except this has mentioned anything about it, and Thorin's head whipped around, his hair fanning out so far that it wrapped around his throat like a scarf when he stopped to face Bilbo.
Your apprentice,
Thorin said.
Leah, your apprentice.
What about her? The smile that twitched in the corner of Thorin's mouth was small, but it was the first Bilbo had seen in what felt like a month. Even better, the king seemed on the verge of laughter when he answered,
I cannot tell you what to give a cook, Bilbo, because I have only ever touched the tools of your craft while mending or creating them in a forge. For many years I was not a lofty king, but I was never so far from my people that I had to cook for myself.
Of course not, Bilbo said, feeling his own smile rise to answer Thorin's in relief. Really, he had been worrying too much about the king's mental state of late, if he was reading some dramatic emotion behind Thorin's usual reluctance to admit that he was not in fact all-knowing. Thank you for explaining. I can ask Bomba for advice on the particulars.
I could speak of the more general customs,
Thorin said, returning to the breakfast table and taking a seat.
If you think that would be helpful.
Oh, yes, Bilbo said, positively grinning at the warmth in the king's voice. Please, if it wouldn't be too much trouble. Apparently, it was not. Thorin settled in and resumed eating as he explained,
A master gives their apprentice gifts that will help the student grow in their craft. So in a sense, there is no such thing as an inappropriate gift. Any gift an apprentice receives from a master is understood to be such. Even if you were to give her a handcrafted ring with the seal of your family, she would simply try to understand how this was intended to forward her learning.
Ah, so you're telling me that even if I make a mess of things and give an entirely inappropriate gift, I can't get it too wrong. That's a relief. At least I won't have to worry about her thinking I'm trying to court her or something ridiculous.
No.
Thorin's smile was big enough now that Bilbo could see his perfect white teeth.
We wouldn't want that.
Seeming to recollect himself, the king turned back to his breakfast and seized another scone from the basket.
In any case, the general form is to give tools.
Tools?
I am not sure what the culinary guild deems appropriate. Probably pots and pans, that sort of thing. When I trained as a warrior, my master gave me a weapon once he deemed me proficient in it. First I received a sword, then a shield, an axe with the double blade, an axe with a single blade, a longsword, a dagger, a warhammer, a glaive, a boar spear, a pike, and suffice it to say, a fair few gifts after that.
Though it is of course beneath your dignity to boast.
I would not think it necessary to boast,
Thorin said almost playfully.
My skill at arms has kept your hide whole a time or two.
So it has, Bilbo laughed. "Then I should follow your master's example exactly, for clearly that was a dwarf knew how to train another in their craft."
It is what I did with Fili.
Thorin hid his smile by taking a bite of his sausage, but Bilbo knew it was still there.
I think it the right way to treat with a prince, certainly. My master and I would be working with a weapon, and at the end of our training session he would simply tell me that it was mine to keep, making me feel that I had earned it, cemented the lessons he wished to teach me.
That was a very good idea, especially the bit about keeping the actual giving casual. Leia allowed Bilbo to provide provender, especially when he was teaching her to make some new dish, because knowing how something was supposed to taste was a vital part of cooking. However, she could be quite stubborn about earning her way, and she still insisted on paying Bilbo instead of accepting a share in the profits of the mushroom mine. Still, if there were dwarven tradition to back him, Bilbo could equip her as well as any young bride in the Shire. It was a happy thought, for she was in fact a maid just starting out in life, and she had no family to look after her.
I am curious.
Thorin's soft voice interrupted Bilbo's planning.
Yes? You did not file a contract of apprenticeship with the royal scribes.
No, I drew it up myself. We each have a copy, but we decided not to file it with anyone else. Bilbo studied Thorin's face carefully. He was not surrounded by the usual dark cloud, so the hobbit dared to chance it. "I will tell you our secret, but you must promise not to be cross." Thorin pressed his lips together in a thin line, clearly hiding the smile which twinkled in his eyes.
My word of honor.
"She wanted to pay me 10 crowns a week."
It is kind of you to take her for so little, but I can see why you did not want it made public. The Culinary Guild is under more scrutiny than other guilds. Boffa, for instance, recently took a talented young miner under his wing for only 5. Unfortunately, what you do from such charity of your heart, others might see as weakness in your guild.
Bilbo coughed. "Quite, especially since I managed to talk her down to 1. After a long moment, Thorin said,
Of course you did. I'm surprised you did not insist on paying her.
"I did try," Bilbo offered. "She looked like she was about to cry, though, so we compromised." Shaking his head, Thorin said,
I do not know if she's lucky or cursed to have a master such as you, my burglar. An apprentice should not need to be the one to insist on doing things properly.
The clock built into the stone mosaic on Thorin's wall rang a soft musical bell indicating the hour. "Enough about my apprentice," Bilbo cried. "We have to hurry or we will be late to meet yours."
Fili is a full craftsman,
Thorin corrected, though he obligingly finished the last few bites on his plate. "He is a friend, doing me a kindness," Bilbo said, clearing the dishes. "I should like to go at once." And so they did.